Greetings and good Monday morning, this 11th of December 2023. Still the third decade of the 21st century. I always open with that, so if for any reason this is your first time coming over to my channel, I always open with that to sort of highlight the fact that if you actually take stock of where we are, it is indeed the third decade of the 21st century. And why do I like to point that out? Because there were people that had hypothesized where we would be as a society, as human beings, the sort of things we'd be doing. I don't know that they could have ever imagined or even fathomed that we would be dealing with the sort of things we are currently dealing with. But it is what it is. So, as Sydney Watson likes to put it, welcome to my hell gondola. With that being said, one of the things I like to do on my channel is, for those that do take the time to watch, listen, or both, but more importantly, leave a comment. I like to read those comments out loud, react, and respond unless otherwise told not to. So, without further ado, from one of my buddies that I served with, we served for a time in 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines. That's in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. I don't believe they exist in that capacity anymore. I think they've been redesignated, but, you know, a different conversation for a different time. He and I would always get into these intellectual conversations when we were both on active duty. As you can imagine, they could be exacerbated by alcohol. But without further ado, the last video I posted, November 8th, I was talking about several different topics, but mostly I keep coming around to the same thing. It's the confirmation bias and the bias in journalism, where they're basically serving a master, so to speak. And I keep kind of hinging on that topic over and over again. Because perhaps maybe I just haven't felt some sense of closure or conclusion. But here we go, Mike. I don't believe there really is objective journalism. Human beings will always tell a story in a way that reflects their own view. These days, though, it's more about who paid you to tell the story. When the When the journalism business is all owned by the same investment groups, it really has an influence on the delivery of the final product. True. Essentially, if you actually do any research, you might be shocked to find out that certain media outlets that sort of fancy a certain line of thinking, a certain method of storytelling, well, as it turns out, they all kind of belong to the same massive investment group, as it would turn out. That sometimes investment companies specialize in an area like media. So like your MSNBCs and your CNNs and whatnot, and anybody else of that ilk, are probably owned by the same investment group. You know, so, and if you weren't aware of that, as an investor, if you have a certain line of thinking, if you have a certain socio-political view, you can sort of invest, you can sort of enforce that as a high-level investor. Now, say someone like me who might only 2 or 3 shares, probably not. But a majority share owner who's on a board could potentially sway how the stories are told. All right, where'd we go? Yeah, the Trump issue is simple. I don't believe he's ever going to see a day in jail. This is a campaign of lawfare to drain him of his resources as quickly as possible. There's no better way than to launch several lawsuits and have Trump face legal bills that would cripple some small nations. Yeah, and not that I have a particular direction, and nor that I could potentially quantitatively sum up my thoughts in a logical, coherent manner, but I'll do my level best, which may not amount to much. On the issue of Trump, there is a significant and tremendous amount of bias. Where the source of that bias originated, I don't know. Trump went from being well respected, talked about, so on and so forth, you know, inside the circle, you know, choose your phrase that suits your desires, to when he announced that he wanted to run for political office, but he chose the Republican Party to be his representation. All of a sudden, he grew horns and a tail and was essentially Lucifer incarnate. And I found that to be fascinating. And that, I guess, not because he was deemed Lucifer, but the amount of ire, the amount of negativity he attracted. I was like, well, what is he really? He's anti-establishment, as in he's not part of the establishment. If anything, he was on the opposite end where he was paying for politicians. Now he's trying to be a politician who doesn't require somebody else to fund his campaign. He's funding his own campaign so he can literally have his own talking points. I thought that was kind of fascinating. Did I admire everything about him and the way he conducted himself? No, not necessarily. This thing with all the different lawsuits, though, I don't think I've ever seen any other person in American history face this level of scrutiny and this level of discrimination before in my life. And what's sad is I often wonder, in the scale of humanity, you see, history is all about the story that gets told and the story that stands the test of time, whether or not there's truth in it or not. You know, like some people are arguing against the purity and the nobleness of Christopher Columbus and how we should no longer celebrate him because in reality he was a really, really bad person. Okay, many different people can have multiple points of view, and a lot of it comes down to experience too, right? If I had a positive experience with somebody, then my thoughts, my views, and my opinions are probably going to reflect positively. Vice versa, if somebody had a negative opinion, you can see where I'm going with this. But I don't think I've ever witnessed anybody like Trump, and it gets me to thinking, how many other figures are there like that have received the Trump style of treatment unjustly? I personally don't think the treatment of Trump is just. What scares me is there are people who do. There are good people, people that I know, people that I would trust with my kids, people that I would leave my kids to in a will to take custody of them, that are bought and sold on this idea that no, you don't see the tail, you don't see the horns, you don't see the pitchfork, you don't see the flames of hell that surround him in the background. You're blinded by something else. I see, I know. Trump bad, Orange Man bad. And it fascinates me that we are literally that split. Just like there are people that are like, no, Biden good, Biden strong, Biden smart. And I'm like, what Biden are you watching? And, you know, perhaps that's part of what makes our country great, is that we can exist like this. I feel this way, you feel that way. I just don't think I've ever seen it so emotionally intense. I don't think I've seen so many people paying attention or so many people actually caring. It's actually kind of fascinating. But then it makes me wonder, since I don't think Trump is being treated fairly, and I think I could point out plenty of examples of how he's not being treated fairly, I stopped for a minute. I'm like, well, how many other people in history got the same level of treatment? Just a little food for thought. All right, so Mike, let's move on to your next subject. The Israeli issue is one that will only be solved through violence. Too much time has passed where both sides have committed heinous acts of violence and barbaric, savage, indecent acts towards each other. So far, this has only been in the Gaza area, but if another country or entity gets involved, this will escalate fast. The IDF has only a certain window of opportunity, as the Palestinians will use civilian casualties as a means of propaganda to enhance their cause. Okay, on that particular note, I'm going to do something here real quick. All right, on that particular note, Mike, I don't know that you and I would be unified on this particular issue, which is okay, because I know you and I could still get along even if we don't see eye to eye. Maybe I look at this from a completely different angle. Maybe I see this completely differently, where I look at the tactics involved. Whether you want to, you know, call the Palestinians a group of terrorists or an entity of people that have supported terrorists, because let's not forget, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I would probably have to say the tactics involved in mass, the standard operating SOPs. Remember those, Mike? SOPs. The standard operating procedure is where I would have to begin to define people. So the Israeli Defense Force, IDF, has to operate with a certain standard of conduct, a certain standard operating procedure, if you will, one that can meet the go, no-go criteria of, say, its neighbors watching. And I don't mean its Arab neighbors, but I mean, you know, people like us. So people like us watching as Americans would have to agree to their tactics. And perhaps maybe that's where we disagree. Is you may agree that the Palestinians and Hamas are just, responding in kind, where, I'm not so sure I care how far back in history anybody wants to go. The unfortunate universal truth is there's the haves and the have-nots, and there's the coveted. There's always somebody that has something and somebody who doesn't, who wants it, and they're going to covet it. I don't think that some very wise decisions were made in the past, albeit the people making them thought they were wise decisions. Case in point, Mike, and I'm sure you'll have fun with this one if you want to take this particular topic and run with it as a point of conversation. The Duran line. So the boundaries in what we now call the Middle East, say Pakistan, Afghanistan, even Iran, so on and so forth, were not as clearly defined depending on who it is you talk to. But the British Empire eventually came in and said, no, we're gonna, this is Afghanistan and this is Pakistan. But nobody told the people that lived there. So many of the people we dealt with, the Pashtuns, they didn't recognize a boundary. They didn't recognize a border. But I digress. In at the conclusion of World War II, like the United Nations or NATO or whatever decided to make this area the land of the Jews. And then there's all these people that take to the internet, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, talking about historical references, who was here first. I don't know that I care. I think at the end of the day, I look at the conduct of people. And for the unfortunate truth is this: you can find horrifical things in all of the biblical writings, whether it's the Torah for Judaism, hopefully I got that right, the Bible for Christianity, or the Quran for Islam. You can find things that, as they are written, come across as pretty inhumane. It just is what it is. However, only one particular religion in the 21st century is utilizing certain tactics, and again trying to justify them and hide behind the Quran and Islam to justify their actions and tactics. That doesn't mean all Muslims believe in this conduct and this behavior, but anywhere between 15 to 25% of all practicing Muslims believe in the jihad, believe in the struggle, and believe in the extermination of the Jewish people. If you have 1 million Muslims, that's anywhere from 150,000 to 250,000 Muslims that believe in the extermination of the Jewish people and the jihad against non-Muslims. If there's 1 billion Muslims, then that's anywhere between 150 million Muslims to 250 million Muslims that believe in the jihad and the struggle against non-Muslims and the extermination of the Jewish people. I'm just saying. So I tend to look at it in the scope of who's doing what to whom and how are they doing it. And if you're using terrorist tactics like hiding behind civilians, using civilians as human shields, so on and so forth, you tend to get you tend to lack favor, in my opinion. As an American citizen, I really wish America would stay out of this situation and stop sending money or armaments. Neither of these people are a friend or an ally. I'm sick and tired of watching American politicians prostituting themselves to AIPAC, and the Zionist movement. Take your pick of events, the USS Liberty, Epstein Island, or the fact that the Mossad has more agents working within the American borders than any other agency. These people are a leech and a burden on the American people. I care about America and my support only goes to its people. Yet I've had many argue with me that somehow I am not a patriot because I don't see this issue in lockstep with our politicians that piss away billions annually in free handouts to this first world nation in the Middle East. How do I respond to that? Well, I don't know. I'm not against Israel. If I had to support anybody who keeps the wolf at bay, I would say I'd probably want to support Israel. If for no other reason than the overwhelming majority of Muslim nations don't exactly see us as a friend. The only reason we get along with some of these countries is if they are in fact somewhat modernized, somewhat westernized, due to the privileges that wealth can bring, wealth brought on by oil. Then perhaps there's an interest in making nicey nice with somebody who could otherwise would just rather piss on our back and tell us it's rain. I think I would probably be more in line with supporting Israel than I would say Ukraine. I don't know what we stand to benefit over supporting Ukraine other than potentially damaging the Russian military, potentially damaging the reputation of Putin. Perhaps, maybe, I don't know. But some of the reports that the forces fighting against the Russians are Nazis, white supremacists, I don't know. I haven't really confirmed it. I don't spend a lot of time dealing with it. On the other side of the issue, though, Mike, I've said that, you and I have both said that, God, we're going back almost 30, can you imagine, almost 30 years we were talking about taking care of the issues at home before we take care of other people's issues. I don't disagree with that sentiment whatsoever, and I don't think that makes you any less of a patriot. I think you have a point, yes. If we have significant issues at home that could benefit from financial resources, then I say, yeah, we should definitely take care of the issues at home before we take care of others. I understand in the quote-unquote non-denominational Christian mindset, charity is part and parcel to the whole standard operating procedure, if you will. I don't know that it should be unlimited. I think we should potentially have a cap, you know, as far as like, hey, look, we've done this much for this year. We're tapped out. We got to start taking care of ourselves. We've done this much over this many years. The situation has not improved. This well is dry. We're going to stop digging. We're going to start taking care of the issues at home. I'm all for that kind of concept, that kind of sentiment. And not to violently change subjects, but like on the subject of abortion, right? I don't exactly have a hard line stance on it, other than I do believe there should be a somewhat federalized standard of limitations. However, I can certainly understand where the states want to have the right to adjudicate that on their own. But I do think there should be a window of opportunity to shit or get off the pot. I think it was Virginia that was trying to entertain this absurd notion of late-term abortions. But that's kind of my point, though, is there has to be a point when you either shit or you get off the pot. And that's what I'll say about that. On a completely different note, Mike, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that provides some feedback for you. And if you want to respond to that, by all means. While there are certainly any number of topics we could talk about, I don't want to be repetitive, which I have a tragic history of being repetitive. So instead, I'm going to try and switch gears a little bit and try to hit one particular topic for the purpose of generating conversation. Obviously, I've seen the feedback on my channel, or the lack thereof, and I don't always generate conversation, but I'll try. Not the last debate that I haven't seen yet, but the one previous, where Vivek Ramaswamy came out swinging. On that debate, and possibly the last one I haven't seen, and on some other podcasts, you know, he talks about making these sweeping cuts to the federal system, basically federal employees. And he talked about, I don't know, you know, we'll do it like if your social security number ends in an even number, you're gone, you're let go. On one hand, I agree. On one hand, I'm like, okay, you know, yeah, you know, decrease the size of the federal government, decrease the amount of tax money we have to pay in order to fund these people. And then I had to stop for a minute, and I had to go, hang on a second. I'm a federally funded employee. I'm a contractor that works for a federal contract for a federal agency. Now, Congress and the Senate have said that what we do is necessary, but what if we are part of Mr. Ramaswamy's cuts, that we are deemed an unnecessary expense? And that's where I want to potentially open up the opportunity for discussion. I'm not against limiting the size of the government. That was the initial intent of our founding fathers, was to give more control back to the people, by going against tyranny, by going against monarchies and whatnot, and creating a sense of self-governance. So I'm completely on board with shrinking the size of the federal government within a degree. I'm all about shrinking the entities that would otherwise be intrusive, that would otherwise be a burden. Like, I don't know that we need 80,000 additional IRS agents. I don't know that that's necessary. But in that vein, I agree. If it's an agency that has not necessarily proven its worth, and using the scientific method, the results speak for themselves, I can understand. I also understand, and this is where I'm trying to generate the conversation, what is the reaction? Because every action has to have an equal and opposite reaction. If you say, take a look at the Department of Education, and you look at the scientific mathematical results, and you say, as an example, the Federal Board of Education or the Department of Education has not proven itself worthy, that it is a reinforcement of failure, that it is an exercise in failure, the well is dry, stop digging, and we disband the Department of Education based on the scientific method. You've been weighed, you've been measured, you are worthless. How many people are employed by the Department of Education, and what happens to them? Some of these people may be in a position to retire. Do we cancel their retirements? Do we keep their retirements? What then? Because let's also think about it this way. And Mr. Ramaswamy will never see this, but just food for thought. And he doesn't have to care. And that's part of what I love about him not being bought and paid for by another agency. He's funding himself. He doesn't have to care, and I admire that. But think about how many people you could potentially be making unemployed, by how many positions you might be terminating, raising the level of unemployment. I'm not saying these people are unemployable, but now they're unemployed. I will say this. I don't know about the rest of the country, but where I currently live, we are having a hard time staffing educational positions. They don't pay very well, so people are not necessarily driven to do them. They are often done by people who use them as a form of supplementary income. Tragically, they are populated by a lot of spouses who, in my county where I live, being it's a predominantly military county, a lot of these spouses pick up and leave when their spouse has to pick up and leave. Whether that's a termination of service, whether that is relocating to a new base, and we constantly have gaps. So I think one thing that could be done is that realistically, people in the Department of Education could potentially go back to being educators, and I would like to see more funding going towards education, whether that is a universal federal tax, whatever. I would like to see educators get paid more, but I would also like to see a revamping of the education system altogether. Now, that's a totally separate argument from what I was bringing up, but the point that I'm trying to make here, so that I can close this out, is Mr. Ramaswamy is proposing dramatic cuts to the federal system. On one hand, I'm on board with it, but I don't know that it can be as non-discriminate as he was making it. What I heard him say was something as completely random as, if your social security number ends in this. He's also made comments about certain law enforcement agencies, whether or not they're actually doing their job, and if, like, folding the FBI and then just absorbing them into the U.S. Marshals. Maybe that is a good idea. Maybe we do need, to rock the boat a little bit. I don't know, but I'm curious to hear from anybody else. Me personally, I think it's okay to make those cuts, but I think they need to be more discriminatory than non-discriminatory, because cause and effect, right? If there's X amount of people that are currently working for these agencies that know that if they vote for you, they're out of a job, then why would they vote for you, period? I mean, by that very metric, if they know that they're risking their livelihood, the way that they pay their bills, by voting for a visionary like Vivek Ramaswamy, then why would they? My proposal would be entertain the idea, be more discriminate about it, and have a plan ready to go. To include potentially have a plan to offer employment opportunities to these people that are being let go. I'm not saying they have to take it. I'm not saying it's a guarantee of anything, but offer like the opportunity to transition to a similar job elsewhere. Provide that. Like, look, we're not getting rid of you because we think you're worthless. We're not getting rid of you because we think that you don't have, value. We're getting rid of the entity that you work for because the overall entity that you work for sucks and is not fulfilling its services, or whatever the case may be, its service agreements. But I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to hear what you think. Should we drastically cut certain federal agencies? Should we be discriminatory about it, or should we no, just whatever? If your social ends in an even number, sorry about your damn luck. Pound sand, go find a job elsewhere. Pull up your boots by their bootstraps or whatnot. I'd like to hear from you. And if you do leave a comment, I promise I will read, react, and respond to your comments. And I apologize for the gaps in between. It just is that time of the year. I've had so many different things I've had to try to get done. And, no disrespect to anybody, but these videos aren't as important because they don't make me any money. I don't get a tremendous amount of comments, but it is what it is. If you leave a comment, I promise I will read, react, and respond. I'm a small channel. I'm not monetized. So your voice will be heard. And if you do, I appreciate it. You're awesome. Until next time. And we're out.